The first rays of sunlight stretched across the dusty street of Salvation Creek, casting a golden haze over the scene unfolding before a silent, uneasy crowd. At the center of it all stood Sister Catherine, perched on a wooden platform, her slender frame trembling though she fought to appear calm. The once pristine white fabric of her habit clung to her like a cruel reminder of the vows she'd taken. Vows that now fell hollow in this moment of humiliation. The shouts from below rose like a wave, coarse voices calling out bids as if she were nothing more than livestock. $300, bellowed Magnus Cordwell, his voice oily with false cheer. His grin, a glint of gold from his teeth, was a predator's smile. The so-called bride auction was a creation, a farce dressed in civility to mask the ugliness beneath. Catherine knew better. This wasn't matrimony. This was bondage, plain and simple. She closed her eyes, forcing her mind away from the jeers and leers of the gathered men. She pictured St. Mary's orphanage, the fragile faces of the children she'd sworn to protect. Emma, burning with fever, little Tommy who still sobbed for a mother he barely remembered. Winter was near. They needed food, medicine, warmth, and the church coffers were bare. The town's charity had run dry. This auction was the last, bitter resort. $350, came a voice in the crowd, sharp and cruelly familiar. Catherine's stomach twisted. Jake Morrison, a brute known for his cruelty to both beast and woman. Her hands gripped the post behind her so hard she felt splinters pierce her skin. $400, rang out next, and the bidding went on, the numbers rising like a drumbeat of doom. With each shout, something inside Catherine seemed to splinter apart. She had vowed poverty, chastity, obedience. Now she stood ready to betray all but the last, to save those who could not save themselves. She caught sight of Father Miguel, standing helpless near the general store. His face was lined with sorrow, his efforts to stop this travesty having failed at every turn. Cordwell held a mortgage on the orphanage. He demanded payment, not promises. $500. A voice cut through the noise, drawing the crowd's attention. Catherine's eyes opened. A stranger pushed forward. A man whose clothes spoke of better days, whose eyes told of battles lost. Broad-shouldered, weathered, and scarred in ways deeper than skin, he seemed out of place among the leering faces. His gaze met hers, not with hunger, but with something harder to name. 6 months ago, this man, Thaddeus Whitmore, had been a king of cattle country. His ranch stretched farther than the eye could see. His herds were vast, his future secure. Then the rains failed, and the drought bled him dry. Cordwell came, as always, with papers and that snake smile, and took it all. Now here he was, penniless, but for a few coins, watching his decency was auctioned to the highest bidder. $600, roared Morrison again, elbowing through the crowd. His intentions were plain in his bloodshot eyes. Catherine's breath came in shudders now, her lips forming silent prayers, her terror barely hidden beneath her composure. $700, another voice shouted. Thaddeus clenched his fists, his fury rising like a storm. Around him were not men, but jackals, circling a wounded soul. He thought of walking away, of letting this town and its sins burn without him, but some battles couldn't be ignored. $800. Morrison barked, his grin widening, his greed unhidden. Father Miguel stepped forward, hands raised in one last plea. Please, Mr. Cordwell, there must be another way. The time for begging's done, Padre, Cordwell sneered, waving him off. Business is business. Going once. Thaddeus felt the small weight of his coin pouch at his belt. It held his last hope, meant for one final bid to reclaim what had been stolen from him. But as he looked at the young woman on the platform, at her pale face, at the courage shining through her fear, he knew that hope had changed shape. $1,000, he called out, his voice carrying like a gunshot. The square fell still. No one had expected it. Not from him. Not here. All eyes turned to Thaddeus as he stepped forward, his boots heavy on the planks. Catherine stared at him, bewildered, but in her gaze flickered a fragile hope. Cordwell's smile faltered, replaced by a calculation. Well, Whitmore, he said, the mockery thinly veiled. Didn't think you had a dime left to your name. My business is my own, Thaddeus said, voice calm, heart pounding. Do you want the money or not? Morrison lunged forward, fury on his face. You can't just... Then bid higher, Thaddeus snapped, his hand resting on the grip of his revolver, his meaning clear. Morrison hesitated. The weight of Thaddeus's gaze, the quiet promise of violence, made him falter. No woman was worth dying for, not to him. He backed off, grumbling under his breath. Going once. Cordwell called, the theater of it all amusing him again. Going twice. Wait. Catherine's voice, soft but sure, stopped everything. The crowd hushed to hear her. Why? Why would you do this? For a moment, Thaddeus couldn't speak. In her eyes, he saw the goodness he thought the world had crushed out him long ago. He found his voice at last. Because some things are worth saving. The gavel came down. Sold to Mr. Thaddeus Whitmore for $1,000. Disappointment rippled through the crowd as it began to break apart. Thaddeus didn't notice. His world had narrowed to Catherine. This woman he'd saved with his last dollar, with no plan for what came next. Father Miguel stepped closer, eyes bright with relief. I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me yet, Padre, Thaddeus muttered. We best get her out of here before someone decides 1,000 was enough. As he helped Catherine from the platform, her hand small and shaking in his, neither saw Morrison whispering to two rough men nor the look on Cordwell's face, the patient grin of a man who knew this game wasn't over. Catherine's legs nearly gave way as she touched solid ground. She no longer belonged to the church. She belonged to a stranger who'd spent all he had to buy her freedom. Easy, Thaddeus said, his voice low, steady, his hand on her arm. He helped her stand. Just breathe. A warm breeze stirred the dust along Salvation Creek's main street as the morning sun crept higher, casting long slashes of light between the buildings. On a raised wooden platform, Catherine stood, her heart pounding beneath the simple fabric that marked her as a woman of faith. The white of her clothing, once a symbol of purity and purpose, now felt like a cruel disguise in this shameful spectacle. Below her, rough voices rose, bidding as if she were no more than livestock. The man who had just spent a small fortune to stop this madness now stood at her side. His skin was weathered by the sun, dark hair streaked with silver, lines etched deep by hardship. His eyes, blue as the mountain sky, held both gentleness and the hard edge of a man who'd known loss. I don't understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the quieting crowd. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. Maybe that's the only reason that matters, he said, his gaze sweeping the square with the wary look of a man who'd learned to trust no one too easily. Father Miguel hurried toward them, his hands trembling, eyes glistening with emotion. Child, are you hurt? I'm all right, Father, she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. The money, it goes to the orphanage? Cordwell strode over, his grin slick and cold, as he counted out bills from a wad thicker than a prayer book. Every dollar, as promised. I must say, sister, you fetch quite a sum. The way he said it made her skin crawl. She clutched her shawl tighter, suddenly aware of how exposed she felt in the middle of the square. We're done here, the man beside her said, his tone firm. We'll be going. Of course, Cordwell said with a laugh that sent a chill through her. Just remember Whitmore. She comes with obligations. You understand how these things work. Church law and all that. His meaning hung between them like a storm cloud. Catherine's breath hitched, in her desperation to save the children. She hadn't thought about what came next. The vows she'd taken, the life she'd chosen, was it all gone now? The weight of it pressed on her, heavy as stone. The children, she said, turning to the priest. Who will care for them now? I can't just leave them. God will provide. Father Miguel said softly, but his eyes were full of worry. The man who had bought her watched her closely, seeing the truth in her. Even now, she thought first of others. Even now, after being sold like an animal, her heart was with the children. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice steadier now, I need you to hear me. I may have been bought today, but I am still a servant of God. I vowed chastity, and I mean to keep that vow, no matter what papers say. He met her gaze and nodded. I wouldn't ask anything else of you. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. She had expected demands, but found only respect. Their fragile peace was shattered by the sound of boots on wood. Morrison approached, his face twisted with anger, two rough men at his side. "Whitmore," he called, voice heavy with threat. "We need to talk. Man like you, losing everything, suddenly dropping $1,000? That's curious." Whitmore's hand dropped near his gun, his stance calm but ready. He saw in Morrison's eyes what he'd seen in outlaws and thieves, a hunger for what wasn't his. "You accusing me of something?" Whitmore asked quietly, the tension in his voice like a drawn bowstring. Morrison grinned, teeth stained dark. "I'm saying maybe that money ain't yours to spend." People began to gather, drawn by the scent of trouble. Cordwell watched from near his carriage, content to let the storm brew. "You calling me a thief?" Whitmore's voice dropped lower, deadlier. "I'm saying maybe somebody wants that gold back," Morrison said, spitting at the ground. Catherine moved closer to Whitmore, sensing danger thick in the air. Father Miguel stepped in front of her, pale but resolute. "If you were in his place," she whispered to the priest, "would you draw, or walk away and lead them off where no one else could be hurt?" Whitmore's eyes never left Morrison. "When I say you and the father take cover behind that trough," he murmured. "Surely there's another way," Miguel pleaded. But Whitmore saw the truth. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about power, about pride. The clock tower tolled. A dog barked somewhere distant, and the air seemed to hum with coming violence. Then came a new voice, steady, authoritative. "What's going on here?" Sheriff Bradley stepped forward, silver badge catching the light. His hand rested on his belt, easy but ready. He sized up the scene with a practiced eye. "Just congratulating Mr. Whitmore on his fine purchase," Morrison said, the lie sour on his tongue. "Strange kind of congratulations, needing 3 men against 1. The sheriff said dryly. "Sister, are you hurt?" "I'm all right, Sheriff," she said, though her knees shook. Bradley's gaze fixed on Whitmore. "Heard about your troubles. Sorry for your loss. But tell me, where'd you come by 1,000 in cash?" "I had investments back east," Whitmore said, the lie bitter in his mouth. In truth, he'd found the money hidden in his father's desk. Money with a past as dangerous as any gun. Morrison sneered. "Mighty convenient, don't you think?" "Enough, Morrison," Bradley said. "You and your boys best move along." Morrison hesitated, then backed off. But his parting words were laced with venom. "Hope she's worth it, Whitmore. Hope she's worth what's coming." When they were gone, Bradley gave a final warning. "Be careful, Whitmore. He'll come looking." Father Miguel urged Catherine to return to the church, but she lingered, searching Whitmore's face. "There's something you're not telling us," she said softly. He met her gaze, the burden of old secrets heavy on his heart. "It's complicated." The early sun spilled gold over the dusty street of Salvation Creek, its light catching on the windows and casting long beams between buildings. Catherine stood, still and pale, on the wooden platform, her heart hammering beneath her plain garments. The cloth that once marked her devotion felt like a cruel disguise now, as rough voices shouted bids for her, like she was no more than cattle at market. Beside her was a man who had paid a small fortune to end this nightmare. His skin bore the marks of years under open skies, dark hair streaked with silver, and eyes the color of summer storm, kind but hardened by loss. "I don't see why you did it," she said softly, struggling to make sense of it. "You don't even know me." "Sometimes that's the only reason that counts," he answered, his gaze sweeping the square with the instinct of a man who'd learned to expect danger. Father Miguel reached them, his hands trembling, emotion thick in his voice. "Are you harmed, child?" "No, Father," Catherine said, though her voice trembled. "The money, it goes to the orphans?" Cordwell sauntered up, counting bills from a roll fat as his greed. "Every dollar as agreed, though I must admit, sister, you drew quite the price." His tone made her skin crawl. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, feeling the weight of every eye in the square. "We'll be leaving," the man beside her said, voice firm and steady. "By all means," Cordwell said with a smirk. "But remember, Whitmore, church law, marriage rights, Obligations, don't forget what you bought. His meaning lingered like smoke after fire. The words hit Catherine like a stone. She had acted in desperation, but now the reality of what she'd done pressed down on her. The children, she said, turning to Priest, what happens to them now? God will provide, Father Miguel said softly, though worry darkened his eyes. The man, Whitmore, watched her, seeing the truth of her heart. Even now, after everything, she thought of others first. I may have been bought, but I am still God's servant, Catherine said, her voice gaining strength. I swore chastity. I mean to keep that vow. I wouldn't expect otherwise, Whitmore said, and the sincerity in his voice startled her. Before more could be said, heavy boots sounded on the planks. Morrison approached, anger burning in his eyes, flanked by two rough men. Whitmore, Morrison barked. You and I need to talk. $1,000? Strain for a man who's lost everything. Whitmore's hand drifted near his gun, body tensed. Say what you're here to say. Just curious where that kind of gold came from, Morrison said, spitting near his boots. Catherine drew closer, sensing the danger. If it were you, she whispered to the priest, would you stand and fight, or lead them away and spare the town? Whitmore's voice was quiet but certain. When I give the word, get behind that trough. There must be another way, the priest pleaded. But Whitmore saw in Morrison's eyes. This wasn't about gold anymore. It was about power. Before it could boil over, the sheriff's voice cut through the tension. What's this about? Bradley stepped forward, silver badge gleaming, his hand resting lightly near his holster. Just congratulating Whitmore, Morrison said, false charm oozing from his grin. Funny kind of congratulations, the sheriff said, his sharp eyes missing nothing. Sister, are you harmed? No, Sheriff, she answered, though her hands trembled. Bradley's gaze turned to Whitmore. That's a lot of money for a man in your shoes. Where'd it come from? Whitmore's jaw tightened. Old investments. Came through yesterday. It was a lie, and they all knew it. Morrison stepped closer, his grin turning mean. Mighty convenient. Enough, Bradley snapped. Move along, Morrison. Morrison hesitated, then retreated, but not without a final threat. Hope she's worth what's coming, Whitmore. When they were gone, Bradley offered quiet warning. Be careful. That man holds a grudge. As they turned to leave, Catherine searched Whitmore's face. You're hiding something. Tell me the truth. It's not simple, he said at last. Most important things aren't, she replied gently. But I've sold myself for those children. I deserve to know who I'm bound to. The priest nodded. Let's speak somewhere private. They made their way to the quiet cafe at the street's end, where only an old man lingered over coffee and the owner kept to herself. Seated in the back, Whitmore finally spoke. My father hid the money, left me a letter explaining where it came from. And where was that? He stole it from a stage 20 years ago. Wells Fargo payroll meant for a mine. He never spent it. The guilt ate at him. He meant to return it, but didn't. And instead of returning it, Catherine said, voice tight with pain, you used it to buy me at auction. I meant to make it right, Whitmore said. But then I saw you. You chose differently, she finished for him. Father Miguel crossed himself. That money means the orphanage is built on theft. The company's gone. No one left to return it to, Whitmore said. That doesn't make it right, Catherine whispered, though she didn't pull her hands from his. No, he said, but sometimes the lines between right and wrong blur, and you do what you can. Their moment shattered as Morrison burst in, gun smoking, men at his side. Well, isn't this cozy, he sneered, talking about family secrets? Mrs. Henderson ducked behind her counter, and the old man slipped out unseen. Let's not, Morrison warned as Whitmore's hand drifted near his gun. One twitch and the sister or priest gets shot. What's this about? Whitmore asked, rage simmering under his calm. Justice, Morrison mocked. Turns out Cordwell remembers old stories about missing gold, unsolved robberies. Here's the deal. Sign over your claim to me, or I tell the marshal where that money came from. Over my dead body. That can be arranged. or let me have the sister, as we nearly settled before. The insult burned. Whitmore's fingers twitched, but the odds were bad. 1 minute to the side, Morrison said, flipping open a gold watch. Catherine saw Whitmore readying to sacrifice himself, and she braced to stop him, but help came from outside. The door burst inward, and the sheriff stormed in, deputies at his side. "Drop your weapons." Bradley barked. The room exploded into motion. Shots rang out. When the smoke cleared, Morrison lay bleeding, his men captured. As quiet returned, Bradley holstered his weapon. "We've got much to discuss." Months later, Catherine watched in the garden as Whitmore mended the fence. The marshal had declared no charges would come. Whitmore had worked tirelessly, earning honest money to repay the stolen sum. Catherine ran the orphanage as his wife now, their bond forged through hardship neither had foreseen. Not all stories end with perfect justice, but from broken pieces, they had built something strong and lasting.